following is an excerpt of a recent Mort radio broadcast.
Karen Reed is guilty. Yeah, she's guilty. Now I know that all the Karen Reed supporters out there, like Turtle Boy, are going to be foaming at the mouth because I said that, but control yourself. Karen Reed is guilty, but she's going to be found not guilty. It's going to be a not guilty verdict. Or at the very least, another mistrial. And why? Because this is a jury trial. That's why. Now, if you're not familiar with the case, let me give you a Cliff Notes version of it. In Canton, Massachusetts, during a blizzard that was occurring in January 2022, Karen Reed dropped off her boyfriend, Officer John O'Keefe, at another cop's house for an after-party in the middle of the night. Hours later, he was found dead in a snowbank. He had black eyes, swollen face, cuts and bruises, just in a real sorry shape. Now, a couple years later, we have a controversy going on that's part murder mystery, part courtroom drama, and part what the fuck. That's the Karen Reed story in a nutshell. She's already had one trial, which ended in a mistrial, and now we're back for round 2. And the question still stands. Who killed John O'Keefe? Now, the prosecutors in both the first and second trials say that Karen Reed killed John O'Keefe, her boyfriend. They say Karen Reed didn't just drop her boyfriend off at the after party. She bounced him off her rear fender of her SUV. They claim that she backed into him, either accidentally or on purpose, and sent him flying into a snowbank, and that she left him out there in the snow like a forgotten snowman. Now, what's Karen Reed's defense? Well, her lawyers are saying that this wasn't a case of vehicular homicide by a drunk, angry woman. They say that this case is nothing more than a frame-up, that this case is nothing more than a frame job that's bigger than a fat woman's ass. Her lawyers are arguing that the real culprits were inside that party, that the real culprits were other cops, and that they beat him to death, and then dragged him outside and left him in the cold to freeze to death. They say that the other cops murdered John O'Keefe. They also say that other cops were just covering up for their brothers in blue, that these rogue cops were framing Karen Reed. Now, as I've already said, the first trial back in July 2024 ended in a mistrial. The jurors couldn't agree on a verdict. They probably couldn't agree what to have for lunch, but more importantly, they couldn't agree on a verdict. The trial ended up being deadlocked. We now have a new trial with a new jury, and even more so, we have a new special prosecutor. And this guy seems to be a lot more prepared than the first prosecutor in the first trial. So we're now underway in round 2 of the Karen Reed trial. One weapon that the prosecutors have this time around is Karen Reed's own words. Whether at the crime scene, or in personal conversations, or even in interviews with the media. One example is that after the incident, when O'Keefe's frozen body was discovered, Karen Reed was heard frantically repeating, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him," by the paramedics, which is, let's face it, not something you want to be overheard yelling at a hit-and-run crime scene. Of course, Karen Reed's lawyers are saying that Karen's words are being twisted. They're being taken out of context. They're arguing that she was overwhelmed, that she was emotionally devastated when she found her boyfriend dead or dying lying in the snow. She was confused, heartbroken, trying to figure out what happened. She wasn't confessing to any crime. She must have been heartbroken and confused when she talked to her father or gave interviews to the media. At least that's what her lawyer's assumption is. Now, adding spice to the court proceedings is fired state trooper Michael Proctor. He's the guy who sent the crude text messages about Karen Reed to other officers who were not involved in the case, and that he openly wished that Karen Reed would unalive herself. All of this, which the defense ate up as part of their frame-up job, part of their conspiracy theory. The defense also pointed towards other possible murderers like Brian Albert or Brian Higgins. The defense hinting that Brian Higgins might have killed John O'Keefe because he was flirting and getting horny for Karen Reed, and that he wanted O'Keefe out of the way so he could get in between her legs. As the defense sees it, O'Keefe was murdered by fellow cops, and the investigators purposely compromised the entire murder investigation and went about framing an innocent woman to protect their brothers in blue. One thing, though, that you have to ask yourself is this: would someone actually risk their career, their pension, their freedom to protect their brothers in blue? I mean, if your best friend murdered someone for whatever reason, if your best friend murdered someone, would you risk everything in your life and risk your freedom to prevent your best friend from being put in prison? I mean, really, would you do that? That's what the defense is asking the jury to believe. In this trial, at least for the prosecution, it's all about pinning down a clean-cut narrative. For the prosecution, it's Occam's razor. The simplest theory is the best one. For the defense, it's about exposing a messy web of loyalty. It's about conspiracy. It's about creating doubt that's thicker than New England clam chowder. The one thing that hasn't changed between the first trial and the second trial is the circus outside of the courtroom. Outside of the courtroom, there's an army of Karen Reed supporters that are waving signs and they're wearing their pink shirts, supporting her, saying she's not guilty. And there's also an army of anti-Karens who are doing basically the same thing, but saying that she is guilty and that she deserves to rot in prison. All these people are acting like they're part of the Salem witch trials. It's really quite entertaining. But none of that even matters. Whatever the supporters or the anti-Karens say, none of it matters. In the end, it's not about which group can shout the loudest. It's about whether 12 strangers, the ones making up the jury, can agree on a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. And there lies the problem. We like to pretend juries are the gold standard of justice, a group of unbiased citizens carefully sifting through the evidence. Nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, juries are easily misled. Trials overwhelm jurors. Jurors are buried under expert jargon, technical evidence, and legal theatrics. Most juries aren't equipped to truly understand what's being thrown at them. And when people are overwhelmed, they don't think harder. They simply fall back on their gut instincts. They trust the smooth talker, the confident storyteller, the lawyer who makes them feel something, not necessarily the one who shows them facts or proves their case. Lawyers know this about juries, and they exploit it. Lawyers aren't just presenting facts to the jury. They're manipulating emotions, a sob story, a flash of anger, some tearful witness. That's often all it takes to sway a verdict. It's not logic or reason. It's emotions. Then there's this worshiping of so-called experts. Dress someone up in a PhD in a firm voice, and jurors will just nod along, even when these so-called experts are wrong, or they're biased, or even when they're outright lying. Even worse, humans are hardwired for stories, not evidence. Juries cling to whichever side tells a cleaner, more satisfying narrative, whichever side tells the better bedtime story. Even when the facts don't line up, that's the way they go. Reality becomes secondary to emotional coherence. And in the jury room, it even gets worse. Stronger personalities bulldoze over the weaker personalities. Actual studies have shown that 2 or 3 jurors usually control the entire deliberation, with all the other jurors just simply nodding in agreement to whatever personality has the stronger opinion. First impressions anchor opinions before even half the evidence is discussed. I mean, let's just be honest here. Juries aren't impartial truth finders. They're human beings. They're emotional, fallible. They're easily misled. Our justice system rests on a foundation that is far shakier than we ever would like to admit, whether it's the Karen Reed trial or any other trial. And until we face that reality, innocent people will keep being convicted, and guilty people will keep just slipping away.